Hi, my name is Samuel Carlton, and today I'm going to be presenting over the Common Core that was developed by the National Governors Association in 2010 as a response to create consistency and to put our children at the best possible place so that way they're competitive in testing sense and that way they're measurable across country lines. So to give a brief overview of this, I plan to give you the history, why it was created, how it was created, and how implementing it, how that's gone. So if we can look at the history of education, education as a whole has started out as a very community-based or at the township level as a broken up counties. But as time has gone on, you see townships coming together or townships grouping together to create districting, or counties as a whole consolidating those townships, and they will have themselves a very large school where they can mandate what's going on inside those classrooms. Then you see states creating their own departments of education where they have a state superintendent or something along those lines where they can mandate what's going on inside their state. And that's how it's been for about the last 100 years. Now, as of the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. Department of Education has been created so that way they can fund local education progress and other issues along those lines. So if we look into what the U.S. Department of Education has been able to do, they created the No Child Left Behind Act underneath the Bush administration. This has been a mixed bag of issues that has said, okay, we want to create proficient and non-proficient scales for students, and out of that No Child Left Behind Act, we see the Common Core coming out of it. Now, let's backtrack a little bit and let's look at the states underneath the No Child Left Behind. Underneath No Child Left Behind, states still had to meet proficient or non-proficient, and if they were meeting those standards, they were well funded. The Department of Education would continue to give them money, but if they weren't, they wouldn't have any money. So what you would see is states would either set their goals really high because they knew they could achieve them, or they would set their goals very low in an attempt to make themselves look very good. But that hasn't worked out, and so a lot of people have said that the standards became a mile wide and an inch deep, which isn't good, and that has led to students in those states lagging behind, student progress failing, and overall student test scores dropping with the No Child Left Behind Act. Now, as a response to this, the National Governors Association created the Common Core in 2010 to prevent those problems from happening, to organize what the states would teach, so that way students in New York would learn the same things as Mississippi in general. That way they would have an understanding of, okay, by second grade, we understand how to add and subtract. By fourth grade, we've been introduced to multiplication. By sixth grade, we can divide. And by 7th and 8th grade, we understand some basic algebraic equations, so on and so forth, looking at a mathematics sense. So what they did are they focused what needs to happen. The very basic things that need to be taught are math, language, and literacy standards. Now, obviously, you still have classes like science and social studies going on, and they fall underneath those categories. For example, social studies falls underneath literacy standards, where you are learning how to read and decoding information. That's something that would go along those lines. So let's backtrack again. The way that these standards would be set up are broken down into tier systems. The systems are broken down into 0 to 2, so 0 years of schooling to 2 years of schooling, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 9 to 12. Obviously 9 to 12 being the basic United States high school model, and reflecting those needs. So they will tack those mathematics, language, literacy standards with these goals. So beyond what it actually is, the goal of it is to have shared experiences, focus, efficiency, and quality assessments. Now, underneath the No Child Left Behind Act, assessments were rough. You couldn't, obviously, as we said, we didn't have shared experiences with states setting super high goals and states setting super low goals. That's something that they wanted to take away with and have shared experiences. Focus. We need to know what we're teaching our students. We need to have a clear path to what we're doing, and that's why they created this. Now, what we needed to do, instead of saying proficient or non-proficient, as abstract as those ideas are, what these goals try to do are say, okay, are you ready for life beyond high school? And life beyond high school means, are you ready for college? Are you ready for a university? Something along those lines, something that the ACT usually teaches or measures as a long-term goal. Common Core implementing has been very difficult and very rigid because of a few issues. the national government has helped out in the fact that in 2009, underneath the Obama administration, he approved $330 million to develop testing that would actually go along with the Common Core standards at a national level. But the issue is, while those tests were developed, materials weren't. Textbooks that had been around for 5 years that were basically new became inefficient. You couldn't teach off of those materials anymore, and that was the biggest issue, is that good materials were hard to find. If a teacher couldn't find materials that actually taught to the test or didn't provide the information that was going to be tested, that was an issue for those students, and they didn't know what was going to happen. Another issue is, how do you evaluate the teachers? How do you know that the people implementing this are doing a good job? How do we figure this out? So, teacher evaluation systems have been created across the nation to try to figure this out, to make sure that our teachers are doing what the Common Core requests them to do. However, as I said, states are doing this, but not all states joined into the Common Core effort. States like Alaska, Texas, Nebraska, Virginia have never joined the Common Core state standards. They didn't join this because of multiple reasons, whether that be disagreements about what the standard said, disagreements about how to fund it, or other issues along those lines. Now, there's also been other states like Indiana, Oklahoma, and South Carolina that adopted those standards, but they also retracted. Now, if we look at Indiana specifically, since it's our home state, we can look at what Indiana did, and they adopted it, they rejected it because of political reasons, and then they basically copied and pasted the Common Core standards, and we have the College Career Ready standards. Basically the Common Core in Indiana's format. So we are following, in this state, a similar, basically the same Common Core standards. So while this is for the majority, the Common Core for the entire United States, some states are rejecting it, or they're hiding behind a facade. So that's one thing to look at, that you have to say, okay, are states really getting better, and what has been the result of those? So here's my question. Are the states that implementing the Common Core, have they improved instruction? That's my question. And so to look at this, we have a couple pieces of literature that we're going to review. In my first piece of literature, called The Common Core in the Real World, Hess and McShane take a point to say that the Common Core is young enough to either go right or wrong. Now, this article was written in 2011, a couple years after it had been officially adopted, after a few years of being implemented and testing, but they're absolutely right. In 7 years, this is a very young policy, and it can go either right or wrong. And so we have to be careful when we evaluate this to say, okay, has this been adopted correctly? Has this been officially promoted in a way that is good? Are we really giving it a chance? So I think that's really what Hess and McShane are saying. But what they also say about teaching is that the material really impacts those educators by saying, okay, if you have those materials, you're doing really well, because you can give those to your students. You can say what you're going to be tested on. You can make those decisions. But if not, you're really in trouble. Now, another point that they also say are people that taught before the Common Core came out are going to struggle a lot more than people who have been trained. Like myself, being a social studies education major, I'll do a lot better with the Common Core because I've been trained to teach in that. I've been given the resources more and more. And so we'll touch back on this later with my own thoughts, but I really think that this is something that we need to consider when we look at teaching. Is teaching getting better on the long run or on a short run scale? Another look at this is Heber and Messner's upping the ante of text complexity in the Common Core standards. They argue that the Common Core is very harmful to the reading experience. These authors state that underneath their own state's legislation, you can have more formative, you can go deeper, you can say, okay, what does this book mean? What does the book Holes mean for a fifth grader? Can we dig into that? Can we explore that? What does this mean to you? But underneath the Common Core, you have to say, okay, I need to understand the words like shovel, or more complex words along those lines, trench. How does that fit in, and how can I understand that? Those are the things that they say are wrong with the Common Core, is that you have to look at the trees and not the woods. Obviously, a tree means a lot more to the woods, making it up, than what a single tree does. And that's what those authors state, that you give up underneath the Common Core is to just know what's going to be on a test, and you have to drill and kill. Another article that read and responding to is response to comments assessing the Common Core standards by Porter, McMacken, Huang, and Yang. They commented that the Common Core can result in teaching improvements when they are used reflectively. What that means is if teachers can use resources that they've used in previous years to improve what they're doing the next year, they're going to do the best. So if a teacher says, okay, I taught on Math Standard 1.1, Math Standard 1.2, and Math Standard 1.3 on this day, but I didn't do as well with 1.2 and 1.3, so I had to push them into the next day, and so I spent more time on those overall and hardly hit 1.1. They can self-reflect, they can see what materials they need to get, and they can actually address that as they come up through the next year. Or they can plan out more microscopically about what am I going to do the next day because I know I didn't hit 1.2 and 1.3 efficiently. That's the kind of reflection that these authors say we really need in teaching, so that way we have a reflective base. We know what we need and we know where we're going to get better. My final piece that I reflected on was by Smith, Wilhelm, and Fredrickson, The Common Core, New Standards, New Teaching. And they wrote on the specifics that teaching of writing techniques and point out that the CCS allow teachers to go beyond the basics. Now, while this is kind of in contrast to my previous source, they say writing gets more fun. Students can just write and they can actually have ideas and they can put themselves into writing. Unlike the basics that had been before where, okay, underneath the No Child Left Behind, we need you to hit these standards, we need you to hit these really unimportant standards. You can write, you can put yourself into this. Your writing is argumentative. That's what they say. They point out that teachers can stop promoting rote memorization. And while I agree with this, because you can actually have ideas. That's what the Common Core promotes. Yes, it has base levels. It has a tier system that you go up and up and up. But by the time that you get to 9 through 12, you can actually have ideas and formulate them in a very academic sense. Now, where do I land this? As I've probably put in some personal opinion, I have to agree with my first source in saying that I think the Common Core state standards can improve teaching in the long run. That means people like myself, people that will come into the education field, I think we will improve education through this because we know what to expect. We know how these standards work. We're going to make these standards work for us in a sense that they don't control our lives, but they give us a foundation to look back on. They can show us where we've been, how we want to improve those points, and what we can do with them. Now, for people that have taught for 30 years before, people that retired because of those standards, because they didn't know how to address to them, they didn't have the materials that came out, I think they struggled. And I think the students that had them in those years leading up to their retirement, I think they struggled the most. And so that's where I think it's a mixed bag. Do I think that it improves education in the long run? Yes, I absolutely agree that it improves in the long run. But in the short run sense, I don't think that it improves education in a short run. Nothing that is directly implemented that has to take place right away will improve anything. It's something that needs to take time, progress, and change. As long as we get materials out there for people to use, people to access, we will improve education. Thank you so much. Listed below are my references, and I'd like to just leave it there. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.